And then,
Perfect. So this is basically extension and just kind of looking at what were some of the questions in the hotline so that and then we'll get into the actual forms at the end so that we can take a look at that. And everybody's been doing a great job. One of the things on the broker on the Form 21 is that everybody's been doing that properly. So we'll take a look. Let's just look at some of the questions that they sent in to Annie. And this one, we're starting to have more teams. And so this one has to do with a team environment. So are you individual or on a team?
I'm on the front line. team.
Are you?
Kind
Well,
of.
welcome.
we started doing the kind of like hybrid thing, so I'm still coaching
Good.
people while they're on
Yeah.
his team.
And so, if for some reason, let's just say that you had a listing and Ashley was helping you with that. And then Ashley bought a buyer.
Well, we should do this scenario because we just did this. So he just wrote an offer on Russ's listing. The one-
Okay,
Yeah, so I don't know if this is the same, listing broker has a listing broker's team member has a buyer, wants to write an offer.
that's
So
right.
that's exactly what we did yesterday. So let's see what this says.
Yeah. And so the whole thing is about disclosure. That's what the lawsuit was about. And so here's the scenario. Listing broker has a listing. Listing broker's team member has a buyer who wants to write an offer on the listing broker's listing. Oh my gosh, they just write that.
I know.
Listing broker will be receiving part of the buyer broker's compensation as part of their team agreement. So if in helping with the listing, if we were to reverse this and you were the listing, and then she were to bring in a buyer, or you doing a offer on Russ's listing and you're part of that team, how the bottom line is, how do we make sure that the buyer or the seller knows that you're getting compensation from the other side, basically, is what it is. So the answer is the disclosure is required, but there's no forms for doing that. And so the listing broker and the buyer broker must individually communicate to their own client that a portion of the compensation paid to the buyer broker's firm for services will be shared with the listing broker. And so the disclosure must be made before the client signs an offer or agrees to the term of the PSA. So in your offer, then if you're getting, how you're getting your compensation, then is discussed in your buyer brokerage services agreement. And it was agreed to there before you wrote the offer. Yeah, see that is, and it can be signed 10 minutes before, but it just needs to be before. It always looks better when it's
Not just in the same site. Yeah, that's what we did.
yeah.
So,
And
so,
yeah.
well, I'm trying to think, I mean, that's pretty, like, this person was really thinking about it, so, I mean, I guess in this case, it was the Cindy stuff, so anybody that came through is wearing a frontline shirt, like, it's kind of, but if they don't realize frontline's a team, which most just regular individuals wouldn't know.
Yeah.
And I guess I never really thought that that's something that we really need to disclose, because it's like the buyer's just paying we're getting the seller to pay the 2.5%. So it's like there's your
And
paying.
the main issue there is that the buyer understands. Let's say that you helped in the listing. Oh, well, even better yet, it's Sydney or it's Russ. And some of the anyways, the bottom line here is that we just need to make sure it's full disclosure. If by some chance, like Russ, if if he is getting compensation as the
Mhm.
listing and also the buyer, then what this is saying is that as representing the buyer, you really need to let them
Make it
know
super
how
clear.
you're getting your
Mhm.
compensation.
Like I'm getting paid this percentage, but because I'm on a team with the listing broker, then they're just getting a portion of that because that's how the team structure works.
Yeah,
And I don't see anybody that would lose their mind over that.
no, I would hope not.
So I'll never
Yeah.
know for next time.
And the main
Yeah.
thing is, and then the last sentence then is a good way for you to be able to, um, make sure that this happens and is taken care of properly is that you have an email trail,
Mhm.
as we discussed.
Yeah.
And then ask them, please, come back.
In this case, should we do that like retroactive, like do it now, even though, well, we aren't mutual yet. So, probably be a good idea just to clarify.
Is
how
he
important-
getting anything from the listing side? Justin
Okay,
isn't,
so Russ and Sydney, the listing's offering 2.5%.
Right.
right?
With that, he is paying a percentage to frontline team and then, to me a little bit.
Okay.
So frontline, the listing agent is,
Yeah,
well, Russ is the co-list, yeah, same thing. So yes. a
so
percentage is-
with, depending on the relationship you have, if that was me, and I can just say, okay, so, and I always did this, I don't get all of that. When I'm talking to a buyer
Yeah.
and we're talking about a listing, or a seller, if we're talking to a seller and we say, this is what our services will cost and this is what we'll provide. And then I always tell them, I don't get all of that. It all goes to the firm.
Mhm.
And then I have a prearranged agreement. And so in that agreement, then you can just say, out of that, I have a personal coach that's helping me to make sure. And at the very beginning, I used to say, look, we're held to the standard of an attorney. I'm having somebody look over my offers to
Mhm.
make sure that they are perfect for you,
Mhm.
and that's all you have to
That's a good
say.
explanation.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
then we have the attorney review in there, it's best practices, so doesn't that just cover it all over again? Cause then, if they really wanted to, they'd have an attorney look at.
The big lawsuit was over disclosure of who gets paid and how. And so this has to do with your either seller or buyer understanding how you, fully disclosing how you get paid.
Right.
And so as a part of a team, then, we've always been on the frontline team. And so I would say, there's a portion of this that goes back to the company and then to the team, and then we get what's left over.
Mhm.
And, which is pitiful. No, I'm just kidding.
And with the attorney review too, it's like if they have an attorney review their documents, it's like, is the attorney really gonna like cover that part? It seems like more something that we would, not that they wouldn't know that, but I just don't know if they go in depth.
Yeah, and
That
so in explaining an attorney review, that is a company policy that we recommend on every offer, but then I would say, and since this is a cash offer, I really would recommend if you feel at all uncomfortable, you should do it.
Can
And
a buyer back out if like using that form if they don't actually go and pay an attorney?
no,
Okay, so it
they
has
have
to
5
be-
days.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If we have the attorney review in there, they have that 5-day period.
Yeah, if
You
they
have to
want
show proof that like, if they're just like, hey, I wanna back out, there's not like an inspection addendum to make it easy. If they're backing out within that 5-day period, do they have to show like proof, like, hey, I did talk to an attorney, that's why?
That is an excellent question, because I don't know if there's in the 90 series, if
Mhm.
there's one specifically for an attorney. Or you'd use a blank one and say that the buyer has reviewed this contract with their attorney and been advised to terminate the contract, and the earnest money shall go back to the.
Which most agreements, I mean, if there's not like some weird language written in there, it seems pretty like fair to both parties. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I was just trying to think, like, it's a good one to put in there, but I'm like, can we ever really like back out using that one if we have to give like a reason?
It is,
I don't know.
it is a contingent addendum.
Mhm.
And so they have 5 days, 5 business days to approve, to go to the attorney and get an approval or disapproval or a consultation or whatever.
Mhm.
And what, if they do, great. If they don't, that's great too. But if they go and they say, like it's an owner financing,
Mhm.
and they go to it and they say, my attorney just doesn't like this at all. Well, fine, then we need to be able to get out of that.
Yeah, I'll look at the Form 90s then and see.
I just have never used it and I
Yeah,
haven't.
neither. Yeah,
And so off the top of my mind, I have not memorized all
because I
those.
usually just have the inspection in there. It's like, well, that's your get out of jail free card,
Yeah.
so just use that.
Yeah.
You know, so, okay.
Feasibility, yeah,
Mhm.
those two are the best. Okay, so this next one has to do with filling out 41. And if we look at 41, the document,
Which part of it?
it would be like
Let's see, five.
item 5.
Okay, so 5A.
Okay. So basically this giant question, they wanted to make sure that they were filling it out right. Okay, so their question was, is 5A is the total desired compensation amount for the buyer's agent funded from whoever, either them or the seller. 5C is the total desired, anyways, they go through all of these different things, breaking it down, and I just want to go to the answer.
Oh, go to the answer. Okay, and then we'll go to the form.
Yeah. Assume Form 1A, and that's your listing agreement, says the seller will pay the listing firm 5 apples if the buyer is represented. Okay, so that's your commission as a listing broker or the listing brokerage, okay? And I on the form then says that that's what you will get. I'm sorry, Section B or II says the seller offers the buyer brokerage 5 apples, but if the buyer broker is a limited dual agent, then the seller offers only 3 apples. Now assume that the buyer broker has completed Form 41, which is the buyer brokerage services agreement with the buyer, and in paragraph 5A, the buyer agrees to pay the seller. Wait a second.
Agrees to pay the broker 5 apples if seller is represented. But in 5B agrees to pay only 4 apples if seller is a limited dual agent. Let's digest that real quick.
Okay. So assume the seller has listed the buyer brokerage firm 5 apples.
Can we just say percentage so it's not weird?
That's
Just, okay.
5%.
The apples throws me off, but I can't think as well. So, yeah, but, yeah, okay, 5%.
Okay. We'll just do 5%. If it's land, it can be 3,
Yeah,
4,
there's
5%. Yeah,
It's negotiable.
That's right.
Yeah.
and that's the whole point of this. Section 7B says the seller offers the buyer broker 5%. But if they're a limited dual agent, then only 3%.
That's the part that's throwing me off. Let me go to 7B. Okay, so says that if seller offers buyer broker 5 apples, but if the buyer broker is a limited dual agent, then the seller offers only 3 apples. But this isn't talking about the seller being a dual agent representing the seller and the buyer. So why is it talking about the buyer broker being?
But that would
Limited
be if
dual
this
agent.
was, yeah, that would be if this was,
So buyer broker completes an agreement with their buyer saying, hey, you're gonna pay me 5 apples. But there's
and,
4 apples.
and
So
the
buyers-
listing agreement is that they will pay the buyer brokerage 5%. And
So
you-
buyer broker's putting on their agreement, hey, if I'm doing dual agency, I want 4. I want 4%. And then on the listing side, in 7. Okay, so if listing broker is limited dual agent, represents both seller and buyer. Then on the listing side, the listing agent has an agreement of what percentage they'll want if they're dual agent. On the buyer brokerage, that broker puts down what they want if they're a dual agent. So what I'm confused about is if seller in the listing puts 5%. But it says the seller offers a buyer broker 5 apples.
okay, so that'd be a
But-
total of 10.
So, but if the buyer broker is a limited dual agent, then seller offers only 3 apples.
Okay,
So
so,
that's the part that's really throwing me off.
so it would be the 5 for the listing and 3 acting as an extra, acting as representing the buyer.
So yeah, if they're offering 5 to the buyer in the listing, I go to write an offer. Oh, you're saying, so this is just talking about if the buyer ends up representing both sides.
Right.
They're only gonna get 3, because on their buyer brokerage, their agreement is 3. We can't get more just because. We're doing both. Wow, they're talking about 2 separate things. Do you get what I'm confused?
Yeah, it is very
Do you
confusing.
understand why this confused me? Cause I'm like, why are we talking about how the listing broker will only offer 4 if it's like, it seems like it's talking about 2 different things in one sentence.
Okay,
Let's
so,
move on.
yeah, so
And maybe
you,
it'll make sense.
you have your 1A, and you're going to get 5%.
Mhm.
And then if you are dual agent, then the total would be actually 8% that you would get if you offered like.
If you're the listing agent,
If you agree, okay, instead of 10%, I'm gonna do 8%, only 3% if I represent the buyer.
so here it would be 5. Here it would be 8.
No, 3.
Okay, so,
The firm compensation, yes, you're right, would be the total amount there would be 8.
oh, that's just if buyer's not represented. That's not talking about dual agency, is it?
Okay. So down in section B,
Oh, it's that, okay, so section B.
yeah, and that one would be, that on line 50 would be, if the buyer is not represented by a buyer broker firm, the listing firm compensation, let's say it's 6%.
Mhm.
Because even though they're not represented, you're gonna have to write you're
The
gonna
offer,
have
it's
to
more work.
write the offer. You're gonna have to ask them, the buyer, or you're gonna go and present the offer from the seller's
Mhm.
perspective. If the buyer says, well, you know, you know, what would the sellers, and you come back and you say, I tell you what, let me just have the seller put the offer to you, and then let's go from there.
Mhm.
But you're not represented, but you do get a little extra because you're doing both sides. And that's why that eight, okay, so if you go to section B, now we're talking about, let's say that they're gonna offer 5%
It's
to
just
the buyer broker.
Okay,
Okay, and then II is if the listing broker is a limited dual agent and represents both the buyer and the seller, then that's 6%. of the total. That's what that would equal,
Mhm.
okay?
Yes. So here,
And the way this, I agree, this was, one of the reasons I picked this was because you know, we're gonna hit this.
mhm.
Okay, and if we go down,
So this sentence doesn't make sense. So seller offers buyer brokerage 5%.
right,
But if the buyer brokerage is a limited dual agent, then the seller offers only 3 apples.
in other words,
Where
that,
is it? But that B2 is talking about if the listing broker is a limited dual agent. This
well, yeah,
doesn't
if you're
talk
buyer
about.
broker, if you're a limited dual agent, you'd be the listing broker.
Gotcha.
So what you're
That makes
saying to
sense.
your
I just
seller,
want the
I'm
agent.
gonna be writing the offer, I'll be interacting with them, but I
Mm-hmm.
will not be representing them, and so therefore I will do that for 7%, you
Mhm.
know, or 6% or whatever it is.
Or I guess 3 getting less for
Yeah.
some reason. Okay.
Okay, and this is all, this is all just arbitrary, you know, I mean, because it's all negotiable. That's the whole thing about this.
Mhm.
Okay, so now it goes to Form 21. And it says in the first blank, the dual agent will disclose the amount of compensation seller offered to the buyer broker side.
Which is
17,
section.
yes. So, so let's say it's, let's say it's 5% there, but you're gonna do it for 3. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you would put 3 here.
Then you would put 3 there.
So whatever's in the listing is the number that goes
It
here regardless of what
it
you want.
should automatically fill there. And then the amount to be paid by the seller, paid by the seller, if there's the total amount there, it's just, let me see. If it's 5 and it's a dual agency, then it would be 5 and then it would be 3. Because I've agreed to do that at a reduced price.
Because of the agreement that you had signed.
That's right.
Because you can't just get more because the listing just offers more.
That's right. Okay, does that make sense?
That makes sense to you guys? You kind of came into it halfway and then I was like questioning everything and made it confusing.
Yeah, I followed everything you've said here so far, but,
It's
yeah,
confusing.
I know, I've done lots of dual agencies,
Mhm.
lots of them.
So it's really whatever your agreement is on the paperwork you had signed is you are getting that. You can't just get more because the listing offers 5. If you said 3, you're getting 3.
Right.
So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's just they changed all the boxes. So, yeah, it's just you're disclosing, seller's offering this, but here's what I want. Pretty much.
And the most important thing right there, but the seller is free to agree to pay more than the seller offered.
Where are you reading?
Okay, so right there.
Oh, right there. Okay.
That is, okay, so let's go back. If the buyer wants the seller to pay all of the compensation, the buyer owes the buyer's broker. Buyer broker will write 4 apples or 4% in the second one. In paragraph 17, that doesn't make sense. Seller offered 3 apples to the buyer broker who also is limited. So 3 apples would be written in the first blank. However, the buyer owes the limited dual agent 4 apples. Thus, the buyer wants the seller to pay the compensation. So that would be an example of when that number would be more. But if you are a dual, okay, so then now what they're doing is now you're not a dual agent. And maybe you agree to 4 apples, but the seller's only offering 3. You would put 3 in the first one and then you would put 4 in the second one, and that is negotiating with the seller to pay additional brokerage. And that's something that as a buyer broker and as a listing broker, we need to really make sure that those match up. Because if they don't, that's for negotiation. That's what, it's like a 22A, the second page, when we're asking the seller to contribute to closing costs. It's all part of the negotiation. And so it doesn't have to be exact, I mean, if you are working with a
They're
buyer,
offering 5, you want 6.
yes,
You just put it out there and they could say yes or no.
that's right.
Or
That
counter
will,
back with something.
that will be a negotiating point.
So line 17, buyer brokerage compensation.
Mhm.
So, and this is in the purchase and sale agreement, so
Mhm.
this is what the buyer's asking.
Yeah, this second one that's highlighted is what the buyer's asking. This is
Okay.
what's in the
And
listing.
before
In the
you,
listing agreement?
Even if it's in the like listing in the MLS.
Yeah.
So if it says 0, you put 0,
Yeah.
if there's nothing, and here's what we're actually wanting.
negotiating is part of the whole
Okay.
cost.
So the seller has an offer spot in the listing,
Mhm.
and then the buyer broker puts it in here on 17, an A,
Mhm.
and then,
That's what's offered,
yeah, and then B
is
is
what we're asking.
what the buyer's broker's asking.
Mhm.
Okay. Right. That's good.
And
That's good.
if you have, and it's your listing, of course, and when you do the listing agreement, you've agreed to everything. If you're in a buyer's representing a buyer, then before you write this, you need to know and agree what is your compensation going to be.
Which is on your 441.
That's right.
Mhm.
So if you do like that one where it
Mhm.
showed 5, but yet you've agreed to pay me 6%, then what that does is allow you to negotiate with the seller. The seller may come back and say no. So 17 on a 21, I don't know if it's the same number on 28 and 25 and whatever, but whatever the buyer brokerage compensation is, whatever line that's on, representing either the buyer or seller, we need to really understand that, because that, we need to be able to go back to the buyer or the seller and say, you offered 0, but they're asking for 6%.
Mhm.
And that could be why the purchase price that we're asking for is so close or above your listed price.
So, when you write in the 6%, so the seller's offers, though, this is all only for the buyer brokerage. It doesn't have
That's
anything to
correct.
do with the listing.
Mhm.
That's because that's all in stone.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
6% seems really high. What?
Well, we're just throwing out numbers. This
Yeah.
is just
Right.
fake.
So it would be, yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So if you wanted to be more realistic, let's say it said 2.5%
In the listing.
in the listing.
Yeah.
And you signed an agreement with them that your services require 3%.
Okay.
So there's a 0.5% there that you're asking the seller to pick up. And that's the whole thing about the whole lawsuit is so that
Negotiable.
everything is about that is negotiable.
So, now, when you sign the buyer brokerage agreement to go show property or something, I'm assuming that we're putting in a fee in there that the buyer's going to pay, whether the seller pays it or not.
That's
So on
part
the-
of, that's part of that particular document.
So that's the whole thing of why we have to get it signed before, because if like the listing's offering 2%.
Mhm.
And then you have this agreement here with your buyer of, hey, I want 3%.
Yeah.
And let's say the seller doesn't agree to do that extra
Then that
percentage,
percentage-
it's like, hey, buyer, we had this agreement.
Yeah.
We discussed the compensation, so that's when there's a form where it'd be buyer funded, like the buyer's gonna pay that extra percentage.
So, and that might or could come out of the increased purchase price.
Yes.
Well, if you, yeah, if the
You can
seller,
do it
yeah.
that way,
Mhm.
or,
stack it.
Blanca just did one that was, that it was, I think it was a lot. I mean, that the buyer understood this was an unlisted sale.
Mhm.
And the buyer understood that they would need to pay her compensation, and the price they agreed on was $14,000. So then and we'll go over this in a second, then we go to the 40 or the 40A. And that's when we give that to escrow,
Mhm.
and I don't know what I was thinking, but yeah, you were so right. When we submit that to escrow, that's what as a broker, you get that extra 0.5% or percent.
So let's say like if you're getting 4% total, let's say just random numbers. So if you're getting 4%, but your buyer's paying 1% of that, seller, you didn't stack the price, or for some reason they're just stuck, they just don't want to do it. So the commission part you do in command is gonna be just, here's the total, it's 4% total. So Kelly, gets that, she sends the broker demand. But we just now need a form that the buyer signs that says, hey, escrow, 1% of that is coming from the buyer.
From
So-
me at closing,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's just an extra, yeah, if you run into
It
that
seems
scenario.
Complicated. I mean, so it seems like it could have been more simplified than what they did.
Well, actually, they have simplified these forms. And eliminated a few things. I can't think of them right off the top of my head, but when I went through the training with Annie, where she went through everything, and that's like, trying to drink from a fire hose. I mean,
Yeah.
I just
Here's
don't,
all the info.
yes,
Mhm.
yeah. But anyways, that, let me see,
You want the handout again?
yeah, if we go there, and if you look down where it says, seller is always free to pay more than what the seller offered, if that's what the buyer and the seller negotiate as part of the purchase and sale agreement. So if they offer only 1% and they come back and they say, we're asking that you pay this. So there's nothing at closing for closing costs, but we're asking for you to pay this additional amount. Okay, or we're going to increase the price approximately this amount, and so that this will be a wash. And yeah, you guys know how to negotiate that.
Justin, do you understand the stacking part and making sure it appraises?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like if the listing is this much, be like, okay, well, we're asking for more compensation after, we'll just. Or then they're offering, let's increase the purchase price, ask them for that amount, so the seller is like netting the same amount of money. But when you're doing that, you have to make sure and look at comps of like, is the house gonna appraise for the higher price that I'm offering? Because if it's not, then we're running into issues at that point.
They may not be able to close.
Yeah.
So there's one more caveat in here that we need to be really careful with our buyers, is that, let's say, you're my buyer and I sign an agreement with you for 2.5%, but the seller is only offering 2%,
Mhm.
but I haven't written up the
Offer yet.
offer yet. So then what I can do, and you say, I don't have that money at closing. I just don't have that money. Well, then let's renegotiate that, and then we'll make a change to the agreement.
Which is this amendment. So it's 41A amendment to buyer brokerage,
Right.
and you can just change this to that.
Yeah. Whatever it is,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think the main part is just. Like, you kind of have to get this done before you write the offer, right? You can't just
Yes,
write the offer and go, okay, well, they're offering more, so I'm just gonna get
so
more.
you've got your agreement, with your buyer.
Mhm.
And you're gonna, it's a house and you're gonna request 3% and you've looked at 4 homes
Mhm.
and they're only offering 2.5%. And you've explained to them that if that's the case, then they're on the hook for that or half a percent.
Mhm.
Then that's when they have the conversation. Is that something that you're able to come to closing with?
Mhm.
Because you don't want to negotiate to the detriment of your buyer.
Mhm.
And then they go through all of that and then they'll close.
Mhm. They
How
don't have the money.
disheartening would that be?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one, oh, I love this one.
Oh, fun.
This
Great.
listing agent was complaining because they had people from California that wanted to get all kinds of information about their listing. And then, should I send them the forms for them to fill it out? Are you serious? I would say to this person, I don't care how long you've been a broker, you don't ever submit any kind of contract without letting me look at it. Okay, so remember that we already have a services agreement. And if we have brokers or buyers that are out of state or just buyers, it doesn't matter where they're from. So we just need to really make sure what a listing broker can and should do in this situation. The listing broker represents a seller and has a brokerage services agreement in place with the broker's client, the seller. The broker should perform the duties seller expects of the broker based on the listing agreement. In other words, we want to do everything we can. And if these people don't want to be represented because they have a lot of people that are there in their family that are in real estate. I did this with my kids when they bought a lot in Belize. And the wonderful thing about Belize, all of their construction codes are based on Florida, which is the hurricane world center. And so their legal forms are based on American forms. And so the person that the developer was also the broker that wrote up they bought a lot. And then it came to representation and they said, would it be okay if we showed this to my mother-in-law? She said that. And she is a managing broker in Washington State. And the guy said, no problem. And I had a conversation with him because I didn't understand everything.
Yeah.
And when I went through it, I said to the kids, I said, this looks great. You've got so many days and you can get out of it and get all of your earnest money back. And so the bottom line there is where it says the listing broker, it's right there, should either write the offer based on the buyer's description of what the buyer wants to offer, or the listing broker should assist the seller to make the offer directly to the buyer. So if they don't want to be represented, then we're happy to be helpful. We want to do everything that we can to sell that property. And the broker should not give ever blank forms to a buyer and tell them to fill it out. Oh my gosh, you want to talk about losing your license.
Mhm.
All right.
If you want me to skip any of these, let me know.
Okay, this just talks about flyers. And remember that our Northwest MLS is not an NAR brokerage. It's not owned by NAR like NCWAR was. And so we can list in our listings, we can list what the seller is offering. When I first saw this and they started to say that, after August, they're not going to be able to tell that. Well, they went back in, and because it is not owned by NAR as a part of the ownership of the MLS, then we can list, and we do.
Which is a nice decision.
What do you mean we can list?
If, say, NCWAR was still, a part of, a viable MLS,
Mhm.
then they would not be able to list what the broker is offering,
Oh, yeah.
the
okay.
seller,
So we
the
still
seller.
can.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
and that was the best news of everything.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that happened is that, Northwest MLS, a year and a half, 2 years ago, knew this was coming down the road. And so they have slowly been changing their procedure and forms
Mhm.
so that we would be in compliance. They chose not to be a party of that settlement. Now, what that means is that if there's somebody that wants to sell them put a lawsuit individually,
Yeah.
naming them,
They can.
but they have been proactive in this, and
Mhm.
so
We're
they,
ahead of a lot of other states.
we are,
and all of, yeah.
Northwest MLS is in the United States, they're the number one ahead of everything.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
Good.
So anyways, we can do that, anywhere. Okay, so good talk. Buyer broker has two separate, buyer broker services agreement. So you're showing the same house to multiple buyers.
Yeah.
And so they're just saying, is this okay? And, it used to be that one that was 8 or 9 pages long, the old pamphlet. It talked about showing the property in which the buyers enters and other prospective property and everything. The law still has that once you make that offer, then then your fiduciary responsibility is to that buyer. So what this is just telling you is the pamphlet was revised to eliminate that particular language, but the law itself retains that language. A buyer broker may introduce multiple buyers, clients to a single piece of property, but as soon as one of them makes an offer and signs an offer to purchase the property, the broker may no longer represent competing buyers.
With respect to that property.
Yeah, to
Mhm.
that property. It just is very clear about that. And the broker must refer competing buyers to another broker. And we're happy to do that always in our company.
And
The
then put it on the amendment,
Yeah, the
of the-
referred broker,
which
then,
I think is just,
so in your 1A, if you're a listing broker and you had maybe 2 brokers on there, then, and they don't want to be the dual agent. And they literally, you change the listing and take that person off. So if Ashley and I were co-listing something,
Mhm.
and she brought in the buyer but didn't want to be a dual agent, then
She's off. the
we do a 41, which is
41A, this
A, the listing agreement, where we make changes on that. And no, the buyer brokerage agreement.
So in that case, does it just go in other, or are we saying that you put, like, let's say, yeah, I have, in this scenario, in the thing, so I have 2 buyers, I make an offer for one of them, now I need to refer my other buyer to somebody else if they also wanna make an offer.
Mhm.
So I'm giving a referral, and it's saying that I need to put, on the amendment that agent is. Preferred broker will have to be named in a Form 41A amendment to the buyer brokerage services agreement as an additional agent of the buyer. So that makes me think, do I put it here as co-buyer broker? Or do I just write something in other? The firm appoints co-buyer broker to represent buyer with buyer broker. Creates an agency relationship. So it makes me think if I'm referring, and on Annie's thing, it says you have to name them as an additional agent of the buyer. It makes me think I put it in this section.
Okay,
rather than just put it in. other.
so if I am your buyer,
Mhm,
Justin is a buyer, and we like the same house.
mhm,
I put in an offer,
mhm,
then what you have to do on your services agreement
mhm.
with Justin is add your name so that you can represent him if you want to put a bid on the same house. Now, if you're putting it on another house, and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. So this makes me think it's this section that I'm
Yeah.
actually putting the other name in,
Yeah,
because I'm putting you as co-buyer broker.
that's
Okay,
right.
cool.
Okay,
I think we already kind of talked about this.
yeah, we did. We covered that.
Okay. If you're gonna amend your compensation, you do it before you
Yeah.
write the offer.
Always. So the last one is, oh, and we've just already talked about that, what to put in 17A and 17B.
Okay, buyer broker does not fill in 17B, which is the, hey. this is
Oh,
what
oh,
want
I know why I
paid.
wanted this one. This is where if the buyer broker doesn't put anything in on
anything in
17
this-
at all.
Like in this section, they just
Yes,
put
and
without
there's,
putting
yes,
nothing.
because that will automatically fill, but if they don't put in B, it is to the detriment of your seller if you come back and say, did you want to fill in 17B? We don't say anything.
To the buyer's agent. Okay.
Yes,
So, but if we accept it, it's like.
and
essentially
if it
buyer's
goes
agent's getting
mutual, then the
nothing.
seller doesn't have to pay any brokerage fees.
Mhm.
And that's why I put this in here, because it's really important if we're representing a buyer that we
And
need
when you mean any brokerage, they still have to pay the listing, right?
the listing, but not the buyer brokerage. Yeah,
Disservice to your seller to call buyer broker and ask them if they intended to have the seller pay the commission when seller's offering it. So what if seller elects to pay? What if seller elects to still pay buyer broker even if they missed 17B, which is this one?
then that's gonna come out during the contract, the mutual.
Mhm,
And so how I would fix that is I would reference Form 21,
mhm.
the residential PSA, page 1, item 17. And then I would say, item B,
Mhm.
add 3% of the amount to be paid by the seller. And then that way, that would then be in the contract.
So
But
you're
this-
kind of leaving it up to the buyer's agent to realize that they messed up and make
It
that
is the
addendum.
buyers, remember, we are like, we're on the same category as an attorney. It is our responsibility to make sure we fill out that form correctly.
Mhm,
And you know, sometimes when I do a review, let's say that they do it without a title. Then in my review, I will say, I highly recommend that when you respond to this offer, that you add a Form 22T,
mhm,
because that is really,
mhm.
well, first of all, or a legal description. You know, if they don't have a legal description, technically, you don't have to have that Exhibit A. Yes, but what it does signify is that the seller signifies, this is what I'm selling, and the buyer signifies, this is what I'm buying. So it's very important that if you, like, sometimes you'll see something from like a county assessors as the legal description, like that page.
Mhm.
And they circle the modified legal
Just saying they have
description.
to have something before.
Exactly. Then when the title report comes out, then my recommendation is always get it signed around by everybody and then send it to escrow to
Cause the
be a part.
MLS, maybe people do that and upload it, cause the MLS will fine you if you don't have your
Yes.
legal uploaded.
And no, you can have your legal uploaded, but if you don't identify that document as Exhibit A,
Mhm,
let's just say it's additional broker's remark, they weren't real careful.
mhm.
And they have a computer system that goes through, and if there's no exhibit A, you
Then
get
that's
that
what it is.
fine,
Gotcha.
even though you've got it up there.
Oh, you mean you
It's
have to
just,
label
it's not
Mhm.
labeled properly.
it?
But I'm saying if like you're working out in Okanagan and, you know, the
Yeah.
title company sucks and they don't get you the exhibit A, so like a lien, and you gotta put something in there.
Yes,
So, I mean, they take a very long time. I'm thinking of a certain place.
yeah.
So, and with this, so if, yeah, you're representing the seller, buyer broker puts nothing in there, you're not gonna mention anything, because it's better for your seller.
Mhm.
And the other agent doesn't catch it at all, and you're close to closing, and that buyer's like, oh shit, I don't have the money to pay the buyer broker, then you're probably, the seller's probably retaining earnest money. Cause there's nothing to protect them if they didn't have their funds to close.
Yes, that's
So,
correct. And that's
um,
why that's why at the same level as an attorney, literally every place that we fill in is so important.
Mhm.
And and I don't care. Every time I'd write up an offer, actually, I'd do a listing. And then every time Tom wrote up an offer, he would have me look at it, even 8, 10, 12 years into it. Because you have another set of eyes. And it's a good thing. If they're not your coach, you know, like Ashley is, then you just say, hey, I've got a new thing. Can I just run it by you and just see if anything pops out?
Mhm.
And it used to just, pardon my French, it used to piss Tom off because I'd say, well, don't forget this. And what about that?
Mhm.
I mean, you just, if you're not into it, it's
Mhm.
just it's good to have the extra set of eyes.
This part is interesting that, yeah, as a listing broker, we're assuming that the buyer and their broker are being competent in drafting the offer how they wanna draft it. So if they don't put anything in there, it's like, okay, we assume their buyer's paying it. But we shouldn't recommend to the seller that the counter counters putting that offer in there. Cause
By
it's adverse or
filling- yes,
detrimental to the
yes.
seller's interest.
By filling that blank part in, that's a counter.
Mhm.
Now, sometimes it's like, you know, where FERPT is and they don't know, or if they don't have a FERPT in Associated Docs,
Mhm.
they'll leave that blank, and that does not constitute a counter if the selling broker fills that in,
Mhm.
because they know.
Mhm.
But it does.
And that's interesting, cause like, you kinda just wanna like,
Well,
it seems weird
you're
if the
nice.
seller's offering the money
Yeah,
that you wouldn't put it in there. So in my head, I'm thinking like, oh, they messed up. Or if they were doing a lower offer and didn't ask for anything, it's like, okay, well, that seems to make more sense. And you'd think for the seller, as being the listing broker, you'd almost like want to make sure that that's correct, because then it's more likely to close instead of it falling apart at the end. But
Yeah.
that makes this legal sentence of, yeah, but it makes you think you wanna make sure stuff's just right, so we'll close.
yeah.
Um,
And
yeah, interesting.
let's say they keep on going down. Let's say you go all the way to close.
Oh, here's the part I'm talking about.
Yeah. Should, that transaction should close, but the buyer broker will not be compensated.
Hmm.
If you leave that off. And,
And that's why
then
we
what
see
you have to do is take your buyer brokerage services agreement and go after the buyer that they did not pay at closing.
And that's why we send emails to the office, so you look at it and you go, hey,
Yeah.
did you mean to do this?
So now we have a situation. How's that gonna look when you go into the court and you say, well, I messed up on this and they agreed to this amount and I should be paid it? You know, who knows?
Say too bad.
Yeah, really, that's it.
You messed up.
Thank you for all your hard work. You won't ever do that one again. All right.
Yes.
Now, is that the last one?
No, she wrote a book about that
Yeah.
answer, so,
Yeah,
I mean, but I think it's
if the
everything
buyer
we talked
broker's
about.
firm will have to explain to the court that the buyer broker's firm was not paid at closing because the buyer broker failed to properly draft the offer. That just isn't gonna look very good.
No, be like, well, you weren't competent, so maybe you shouldn't get paid.
Yeah. So if you go down a little bit further, there'll be like three little, right there.
Right here, okay.
I just want to reiterate, it would be a counter offer if the buyer does not request the seller's payment of the buyer broker's compensation, but the seller responds by completing that 17B. That constitutes a counter offer. I just wanted to,
And then that means everyone has to initial it.
yes,
Yeah, when they don't actually use the form they're supposed to use.
yeah.
It's fun.
And so, yeah, that was it. So I thought those were interesting. Does anybody have any questions about the forms? Not that I know them.
I think we know enough. I think we know them enough, but we still question everything.
Yeah.
So, so the listings that were done previously are just fine the way they are? Or unless a certain office wants
know-
you to change them?
Yeah, so what's the standing here? Because it would be,
It says it's up to the brokerage,
it
right?
is
Like,
up, it is up to the brokerage and,
I'll pull up
she-
the
Because I
amendment.
haven't changed mine.
And you don't legally,
Yeah, I
it
don't
says
legally
that
have
it's up to the buyer brokerage agreement, those they're saying that we
Those
have to
you
be,
have to,
have
yeah.
to
But I mean, on the
update.
listing, it's offered the
Yes.
compensation.
So on the buyer brokerage, let's say you had a client that the 1st of July, you signed something, you still have another month or two. Then you need to go back and update that so that they can see that new, all the verbiage and everything.
Let me see, so.
Yeah, but yeah, you do not have to.
I mean, I think maybe it's up to the brokerage because of this paragraph that's just making it, hey, it's super clear that there's no standard compensation, because that's a lot of what the lawsuits were. So I could see that like some brokerages might want to be like, hey, you should get this amendment for all your previous listings, because this is making it clear that they understand.
And
stuff's
you
not-
can, for the listing agreement, you can, just write it just like it's a brand new one and just extend it. Or you can count out the days and say, let's put in these number of days because that's the same term as the original. It really depends on what they
Mhm.
want to do.
And I don't know, I mean, there might be a scenario where your seller's like, hey, I've looked at these other listings and like, they're not offering a commission, or they're putting negotiable or whatever it is. I mean, but that's maybe when
Make
this
an
would
offer,
come
yeah.
up, where they want the forms to be updated, because one of these
Does say,
options for the seller is they can just say buyer to request compensation and offer.
yeah,
So if you have a seller now that's offering a certain percentage and they're like, I want to change my mind and just leave it open-ended, then that's probably when it's gonna come up, but yeah, need to do anything.
okay, well, I really appreciate you guys doing all this work.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
thanks for showing up.
Yes, it always helps when there's people here.
No, you're fine. Well, you
were
have
late. Not that much, we were late getting started.
Yeah.
So
My
any
bad.
questions in Zoom? Otherwise, we can end this.